You don't belong here. 4 words. That's all it took for Lena Cross to destroy a man she'd never met. A CEO at 32, she wielded power like a scalpel, precise, cold, cutting. The quiet man with oil-stained hands, just another nobody cluttering her first-class cabin. She didn't see the scar on his forearm, didn't notice how his eyes tracked the horizon like a predator, didn't know that Ryan Mercer had once flown missions where a single mistake meant death. But the sky remembers what we forget, and sometimes it demands payment. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The Portland Executive Terminal smelled like expensive coffee and entitlement. Lena Cross stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching ground crews prepare her company's Gulfstream G650. Her reflection stared back, immaculate charcoal suit, hair pulled into a razor-sharp bun, diamond studs that cost more than most people's cars. At 32, she'd built Crossair Solutions from a struggling charter service into a $70 million aviation consulting empire. She hadn't done it by being soft. Ms. Cross? Her assistant Jennifer appeared at her elbow, tablet extended. The Henderson contract is ready for your review. They've agreed to all terms. Lena scanned the document, her manicured fingers scrolling with practiced efficiency. Of course they did. They had no leverage, she signed with a flourish. Remind them the implementation timeline isn't negotiable. If they can't meet our standards, we'll find someone who can. Already done, Jennifer hesitated. Also, there's been a slight change to the passenger manifest. Lena's eyes narrowed. What kind of change? Mr. Holloway from maintenance needed to get to the Boise facility urgently. He approved adding one of the technicians to this flight since we had an empty seat. A technician? Lena's voice could have etched glass. On my flight? It's company policy to utilize empty seats for employee transport when... I know the policy, Jennifer. I wrote the policy. Lena turned back to the window, jaw tight. Fine, but he sits in the back and stays quiet. I have 3 hours of work to do, and I don't need some grease monkey making conversation. Jennifer's expression flickered, something between sympathy and disapproval, but she nodded. Of course. 20 minutes later, Lena settled into her customary seat, 2A, the cabin a sanctuary of cream leather and burled walnut. She'd already spread her laptop, files, and phone across the adjacent seat when the technician boarded. He moved quietly for a man his size, maybe 6'1", lean and weathered, wearing a company work shirt with R. Mercer stitched above the pocket. Dark hair shot through with premature gray, a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. His hands, she noticed with distaste, bore faint oil stains no amount of washing could quite erase. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. Ryan Mercer saw what he expected to see. Another executive who looked through people like him as if they were furniture. He'd learned long ago not to take it personally. The world was full of Lena Crosses, people who measured worth in titles and bank accounts, who never wondered what dreams died behind a stranger's eyes. He nodded politely and moved toward the rear of the cabin. Lena had already dismissed him, returning to her laptop. The flight attendant, Marcus, one of Crossair's veterans, appeared with her usual pre-flight champagne. Good afternoon, Ms. Cross. Can I get you anything else before we depart? No, thank you, Marcus. Lena paused. Actually, yes. Make sure our additional passenger understands this is a working flight. I'd appreciate minimal disruption. Marcus's smile never wavered, but something in his eyes cooled. Of course, ma'am. Though I should mention Mr. Mercer is one of our quietest travelers. You won't even know he's here. Perfect. As Marcus walked away, Lena caught him stopping at Ryan's seat in the back. The exchange was brief, Ryan's response a simple nod, but she thought she saw Marcus's hand grip the other man's shoulder, a gesture that seemed oddly familiar, almost protective. She pushed the observation away. Not her concern. The engine spooled up, that deep whine building to a roar that Lena had long since learned to tune out. She was already deep into the Henderson implementation strategy when they lifted off, Portland shrinking beneath them. The first hour passed in focused silence. Lena worked through 3 client proposals, fired off a dozen emails, and reviewed next quarter's projections. Occasionally, she'd glance up to find Marcus checking on her, offering water or coffee, which she accepted with absent thanks. She never once looked toward the back of the plane. It wasn't until they hit the first pocket of turbulence over the Cascades that her attention shifted. The Gulf Stream bounced, not violently, but enough that her champagne flute rattled in its holder. Lena barely noticed. She'd logged thousands of flight hours. But something made her glance back. Ryan sat perfectly still. Not tense, not gripping the armrest like nervous flyers did, just still. His eyes were closed, but his breathing was measured, controlled. One hand rested on his knee, completely relaxed despite the aircraft shuddering. There was something almost meditative about his posture, as if the turbulence was happening to a different airplane in a different sky. Lena frowned. She'd seen a lot of flyers in her career. The nervous ones clutched their seats. The experienced ones read or worked through it. But this was different. This was the stillness of someone who'd spent so much time in unstable air that their body no longer registered it as a threat. The plane dropped suddenly, a stomach-lurching fall that lasted 3 seconds but felt like 30. Lena's laptop slid across the table. Behind her, she heard a passenger gasp, one of the other executives who'd boarded at the last minute. Ryan didn't even open his eyes. Who the hell is this guy? The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. Lena pushed it away and returned to her work, but found herself distracted. She pulled up the company directory on her tablet, searching for R. Mercer. Ryan Mercer. Maintenance Technician 2. Hired 14 months ago. Portland facility. Clearance. Standard. Performance reviews exceeds expectations. Additional notes? None. 14 months. Barely over a year and already exceeds expectations? Lena knew her maintenance department was good. She'd built it that way. But something about the bare-bones file bothered her. No prior employer listed, no certifications beyond the basic A&P license, just nothing. She glanced back again. Ryan had opened his eyes now, staring out the small window at the mountains below. His expression was distant, unreadable. But there was something in the set of his jaw, the way his fingers unconsciously traced a thin white scar running up his right forearm, that spoke of stories her employee file couldn't tell. Not your business, she reminded herself. He fixes planes. You run the company. That's the extent of your relationship. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reeves. We're experiencing some moderate turbulence as we cross the Rockies. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We should be through it in about 20 minutes. Lena had flown with Tom Reeves dozens of times. He was unflappable, a 30-year veteran who could land a paper airplane in a hurricane. If he said 20 minutes, it would be 20 minutes. She forced herself back to the Henderson contract, making notes about implementation checkpoints and performance metrics. But her concentration was fractured. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift to that figure in the back, now reading something on his phone with the same unnerving calm. 15 minutes later, Marcus appeared with fresh coffee. Lena accepted it with a nod, then surprised herself by asking, "How long have you known Mr. Mercer?" Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ryan? About a year, I suppose, since he started. Why do you ask?" "Just curious. His file is rather minimal." "Ah." Marcus glanced toward the back of the plane, his expression softening. "Ryan's a private person, but he's good people, Ms. Cross. Best technician we've got, if you ask me. There's not a system on this aircraft he can't diagnose blindfolded. That's quite an endorsement." "It's the truth." Marcus hesitated, then added, "He's also the only employee I've ever seen turn down 3 separate promotions." Lena blinked. "He what?" "Didn't want the supervisor position. Said he preferred working with his hands, not managing people." Marcus smiled. "Honest to a fault, that one. Last month, he caught a stress fracture in a landing gear assembly that 2 other inspectors had signed off on. Probably saved lives." "Why isn't this in his performance file?" "He asked us not to make a fuss. Said he was just doing his job." Marcus shifted the coffee tray. "If you'll excuse me, Miss Cross." As the flight attendant moved away, Lena found herself staring at her laptop screen without seeing it. A technician who turned down promotions and deflected credit. In her world, a world of ladder climbers and resume builders, that was almost incomprehensible. She pulled up her email and typed a quick message to HR. "Complete background check on Ryan Mercer. I want to know where he worked before Crosshair, and why there's nothing in his file. It was probably nothing. Maybe he'd worked for a competitor and signed an NDA. Maybe he had a gap in employment he was embarrassed about. Maybe... The plane dropped again, harder this time. Lena's coffee sloshed over the rim of her cup. The cabin lights flickered once, twice. From the cockpit came a muffled curse, quickly silenced. That was new. Captain Reeves's voice returned, measured, but with an edge Lena had never heard before. Folks, we've hit an unexpected wind shear. Nothing to be concerned about, but we're going to adjust our altitude. Please ensure your seatbelts are secure. Lena looked out her window. The sky had changed. What had been clear air over the mountains was now a roiling mass of gray-black clouds, appearing as if from nowhere. Lightning flickered in the distance. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer, who was back in Portland. Weather Service just issued severe turbulence advisory for your route. Do you want us to have Reeves divert? Lena typed back, No. Reeves knows what he's doing. We have the Boise meeting in 4 hours. But even as she sent the message, unease coiled in her stomach. She'd flown through rough weather hundreds of times. This felt different. The turbulence intensified. The Gulf Stream bucked and swayed like a boat in heavy seas. Lena's laptop slid off the table despite her grab for it, clattering to the floor. Around her, the other passengers had gone pale and quiet, hands gripping armrests. She looked back once more. Ryan was leaning forward now, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His eyes were open, tracking the motion of the aircraft with minute precision, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not fear. Recognition. He knew something. The way he was reading the plane's movements, the micro-adjustments in his posture, compensating for each roll and pitch. This wasn't a nervous flyer or even an experienced passenger. This was someone who understood the language of troubled aircraft the way a doctor reads an X-ray. The intercom crackled again. Marcus, please take your seat. Now. The command in Reeves's voice was unmistakable. Marcus moved quickly to the jump seat, buckling in with practiced efficiency. The other flight attendant, Sarah, was already strapped in, her face carefully neutral. Lena's pulse kicked up. In 12 years of flying, she'd never heard that tone from Reeves. The Gulf Stream pitched forward suddenly, nose dropping at an angle that sent Lena's stomach into her throat. The altimeter outside her window spun downward. Shouts erupted from the other passengers. Someone was praying in rapid Spanish. Then, just as suddenly, Reeves pulled them level. The plane shuddered, groaned, but held. Sorry about that, folks. Reeves's voice was tight. We're going to be making an unscheduled landing in Boise. There's a maintenance issue we need to check out. ETA 15 minutes. Maintenance issue. The euphemism was clear. Something was wrong. Lena unbuckled, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and made her way toward the cockpit. Marcus called out, Ms. Cross, please sit down. But she ignored him. She'd built this company from nothing. If her aircraft was in trouble, she had a right to know. She reached the cockpit door just as it opened. Reeves stepped out, his weathered face drawn. When he saw Lena, his jaw tightened. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat. What's wrong with my plane, Tom? For a moment, he looked like he might refuse to answer. Then he sighed. Hydraulic pressure is fluctuating in the primary flight control system. Could be a sensor malfunction, could be a leak. Either way, we're landing at Boise to have it checked. How serious? Serious enough that I'm not taking chances. His eyes were hard. Now please, Ms. Cross, sit down and let me do my job. Lena nodded and turned back, but not before she saw the co-pilot, Jensen, working frantically through a checklist, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cabin air. She made her way back to her seat, the plane's every vibration now feeling ominous. As she buckled in, she found her eyes drawn once more to Ryan Mercer. He was watching her, not with concern or fear, but with a steady, assessing gaze that seemed to see straight through her expensive suit and carefully constructed authority to something more vulnerable underneath. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Lena saw something flicker across his face, a decision being made, a line being crossed. Ryan stood up. Sir, please sit down, Sarah called from her jump seat, but Ryan was already moving forward, his gait steady despite the turbulence. He walked straight to the cockpit and knocked, not frantically but with calm authority. Reeves opened the door, irritation flashing across his face. Not now! Captain, I might be able to help. Ryan's voice was quiet but carried complete confidence. I know this aircraft. If it's the hydraulics, there's a bypass procedure. Who the hell are you? Jensen snapped from the co-pilot's seat. A&P mechanic. I work for... I don't need a grease monkey second-guessing my emergency procedures, Reeves cut in. Return to your seat. That's an order. Something in Ryan's expression shifted, a flash of old authority, quickly suppressed. Captain, with respect, if your primary hydraulics are failing and you're planning a landing in high winds, you're going to want to know about the manual pressure override on the G650's backup system. It's not in the standard emergency procedures because it was added in a service bulletin last year. I installed them on 3 of these aircraft myself. Reeves stared at him. You installed? He shook his head. Jensen, verify that. The co-pilot's fingers flew over his tablet. His eyes widened. He's right. Service Bulletin G650-27-4. Manual hydraulic pressure override. Jesus, I didn't even know this existed. Reeves's expression transformed. Can you walk us through it? Yes, sir. Then get in here. Reeves stepped back, then looked past Ryan to the cabin. Everyone else, stay in your seats and stay calm. We're going to be fine. The cockpit door closed. Lena sat frozen, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. The quiet technician with oil-stained hands had just walked into the cockpit of a failing aircraft like he owned it. And the captain, the unflappable Tom Reeves, had let him. Who the hell is Ryan Mercer? The next 15 minutes were the longest of Lena's life. The turbulence continued, the plane shaking like it wanted to tear itself apart. She could hear muffled voices from the cockpit, Ryan's calm baritone, Reeves's clipped commands, Jensen's terse confirmations. The other passengers sat in white-knuckled silence, some crying, some praying. Lena did neither. She watched the cockpit door and wondered how she'd been so blind. When they broke through the cloud layer, Boise appeared below, a grid of lights in the darkening evening. The Gulf Stream's descent was rougher than usual, the nose yawing slightly left and right as Reeves fought the controls. But they were descending. They were under control. The runway rushed up to meet them. The wheels touched down hard, bounced once, then held. The brakes screamed. The plane decelerated, veered slightly, then straightened. They were down. The cabin erupted in applause and tearful laughter. Lena released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. The cockpit door opened. Ryan emerged first, followed by Reeves and Jensen. The captain's face was pale but composed. He keyed the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boise. Maintenance crews are standing by to inspect the aircraft. We'll be arranging alternate transportation for you to your final destinations. I apologize for the scare. He paused. I also want to thank Mr. Mercer, whose knowledge of this aircraft may very well have saved our lives tonight. All eyes turned to Ryan. He stood in the aisle, looking uncomfortable with the attention, his work shirt still bearing the company logo. Lena unbuckled and stood. Their eyes met across the cabin. She'd called him invisible, a grease monkey, someone who didn't belong in her space, and he'd just saved her life. Shame hit her like a physical force. But worse than shame was the realization crystallizing in her mind. She'd spent 12 years building a company, measuring success in contracts and profits and market share. She'd looked at this man and seen nothing but oil stains and cheap fabric. She'd never once asked what those hands had built, what that quiet competence had cost him, what storms he'd weathered to stand there so calmly while her world fell apart at 30,000 feet. Mr. Mercer, her voice came out hoarse. Thank you. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. Just glad I could help, Miss Cross. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, disappearing into the organized chaos of the emergency response. Lena stood there, watching him go, as the full weight of her failure settled over her shoulders. She'd built an empire on knowing the value of things. Tonight, she'd learned she didn't know the first thing about the value of people. The Boise terminal was controlled chaos. Emergency crews swarmed the Gulf Stream, their diagnostic equipment humming as they inspected the hydraulic systems. Lena watched from the gate lounge, still processing the last hour. Her phone buzzed constantly. Jennifer coordinating alternate flights, clients checking in after hearing about the emergency landing, board members wanting updates. She ignored them all. Through the terminal windows, she could see Ryan standing with the maintenance crew chief, pointing to something on the underside of the fuselage. Even from a distance, his body language was different now, more animated, authoritative. The crew chief was nodding, taking notes, asking questions that Ryan answered with precise hand gestures. Marcus appeared at her elbow with coffee. Quite an evening. That's one way to put it. Lena accepted the cup. Marcus, what do you really know about Ryan Mercer? The flight attendant was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I know he showed up at our Portland facility 14 months ago with an A&P license and references that checked out. I know he works harder than anyone else in that hangar. I know he brings his daughter to the company picnic every year and never talks about himself. He paused. And I know that when he walked into that cockpit tonight, he moved like someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. You noticed that too. Hard not to. I've flown with a lot of pilots, Ms. Cross. Military, civilian, everything in between. Ryan Mercer moved like military. Lena's phone buzzed again. This time she looked. An email from HR marked urgent. Per your request, ran background check on Ryan Mercer. Results attached. Call me when you can. She opened the attachment. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen. Ryan James Mercer. Dobie, March 15th, 1987. Prior employment, United States Air Force, 2005 to 2019. Final rank, Captain. Specialty, F-16 fighter pilot. Decorations, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, 4, Purple Heart. Discharge, Medical Honorable Security Clearance, Secret, Inactive. There was more. Details about missions, flight hours, commendations, but Lena's eyes had stopped on 2 lines. Notable incident, Operation Guardian Eagle, 2019. Pilot extracted 6 civilians from hostile territory under heavy fire. Aircraft sustained critical damage. Co-pilot KIA. Subject sustained severe injuries, discharged following 8-month recovery. Current status. Single father, 1 dependent, daughter, age 7. No contact with military community. Declined veteran outreach services. The coffee cup trembled in Lena's hand. She'd dismissed a decorated combat pilot, a man who'd flown into hell to save strangers and lost his partner doing it. A father who'd chosen to work in obscurity rather than trade on his past. And tonight, when her aircraft was dying, he'd walked into that cockpit without hesitation because that's what he did. He saved people, even people who'd treated him like he was invisible. Ms. Cross, Marcus was looking at her with concern. Are you all right? Lena closed her phone and stood. Where is he? Still with the maintenance crew, I think. She walked out onto the tarmac, the evening air cold against her skin. The Gulfstream sat surrounded by work lights, its sleek fuselage looking somehow fragile now that she knew how close they'd come. Ryan was still there, crouched beside the landing gear with the crew chief. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face. Miss Cross, you shouldn't be out here without safety gear. I know who you are. The words came out harsher than she intended. I know what you were. Ryan stood slowly, his expression closing off. That's not who I am anymore. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why work as a technician when you could be what? There was no anger in his voice, just weariness. A pilot? I can't pass the medical exam. My left hand has permanent nerve damage from the crash. Some days I can barely feel my pinky finger. He held up his hand, showing the faint tremor she'd never noticed. The Air Force gave me a medical discharge and a pension I barely touch. I needed to work with my hands, something real, something that didn't require me to relive the worst day of my life every time someone asked about my service. I'm sorry, you didn't know. Nobody knows, and I prefer it that way. He glanced back at the plane. Look, I helped tonight because it needed doing. That doesn't change anything. Tomorrow I'll be back in the hangar, and you'll be closing deals. That's how this works. No? Lena shook her head. No, that's not how this works. Not anymore. Ryan frowned. Ryan, what do you mean? I mean, I built a company on the backs of people like you, and I never saw you. I measured value in all the wrong ways. She took a breath. I can't change what I said before the flight. I can't take back the way I looked at you, but I can do better. For the first time, something softened in his expression. Ms. Cross? Lena, please. Lena. He tested the name carefully. I don't need your apology. I've been invisible before. I'll be invisible again. It doesn't bother me like it used to. Well, it bothers me. She met his eyes. You saved our lives tonight. That matters. Maybe. Ryan looked up at the darkening sky. But tomorrow there'll be news cameras and questions, and I don't do well with that. So if it's all the same to you, I'd like to keep tonight quiet. Let Captain Reeves take the credit. He's the one who landed the plane. Because you showed him how to bypass the hydraulic failure. Because he's a good pilot who kept his head in a crisis. That's all the story needs to be. Ryan picked up his jacket. My daughter's with a sitter. I need to get home. Wait. Lena pulled out her phone. At least let me arrange a car. I've got a rental, but thank you. He started to walk away, then paused. For what it's worth, you're not wrong about how this works. You run the company. I fix the planes. That's probably how it should stay. He disappeared into the terminal before she could respond. Lena stood there on the tarmac, the cold seeping through her suit, watching the maintenance crew work under the harsh lights. Everything she'd built, the empire, the reputation, the carefully constructed image of success, suddenly felt hollow. She'd survived a crisis tonight. But Ryan Mercer had been surviving a crisis every day for 5 years, and she'd never noticed. The shame of that would stay with her long after the turbulence faded. But something else stayed with her too. The memory of how he'd moved in that cockpit, the quiet competence, the certainty of someone who'd faced worse and survived. Tomorrow, the world would call Captain Reeves a hero. Tonight, Lena knew the truth, and whether Ryan Mercer wanted it or not, that truth was going to change everything. The rental car's heater rattled as Ryan drove through the dark Idaho streets, his mind still in that cockpit, hands still feeling the phantom weight of controls he'd sworn he'd never touch again. The muscle memory had kicked in so fast it scared him. 13 months of oil changes and landing gear inspections, and it had taken exactly 3 seconds for his body to remember what it meant to fly a dying aircraft. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. At the third buzz, he glanced at the screen. Captain Reeves. Ryan pulled into a gas station parking lot and answered. Sir? Don't sir me, Mercer. We're not in the service. Reeves's voice was rough with exhaustion. I just got off the phone with the NTSB. They're calling it a catastrophic hydraulic line failure. The backup system was compromised too, some kind of manufacturing defect that should never have made it past quality control. If you hadn't known about that manual override, he trailed off. We'd be having a very different conversation right now. Or no conversation at all. Ryan said nothing. There was nothing to say. They'd both seen enough close calls to know how thin the margin was between landing and crater. The media's already sniffing around, Reeves continued. They want the hero pilot story. I told them it was textbook emergency procedure, nothing special, but Jensen's got a big mouth and Marcus is too honest for his own good. Your name's going to come out. Tom, I can't. I know. I read your file after we landed, or the parts of it that aren't classified. A pause. Guardian Eagle. Jesus Christ, Ryan, I had no idea. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Ryan watched a tired mother drag 2 kids out of a minivan, the mundane normalcy of it anchoring him. That's not who I am anymore. Maybe not. But it's who you were when it counted tonight. Reeves sighed. I'm putting you in for a commendation. At minimum, Crossair needs to know they've got a former fighter pilot working in their maintenance bay. Please don't. Why the hell not? Because I need this job, and I need it to be simple. Ryan's hand tightened on the phone. I've got a 7-year-old daughter who just started sleeping through the night without nightmares. I've got a life that doesn't involve reporters asking me how it felt to watch my wingman die. I just need to fix planes and go home. That's all I'm asking. The line went quiet for a long moment. All right, Reeves said finally. I'll keep it contained as much as I can, but Mercer, you saved a lot of lives tonight. That matters, whether you want it to or not. After he hung up, Ryan sat in the car watching his hands shake. It always happened after. Adrenaline crash, the medics had called it. He'd learned to ride it out, breathing slow and deep until his body remembered it was safe. His daughter. He needed to get home to Emma. The drive to his apartment took 40 minutes. It was nearly 9 when he pulled into the parking lot of the Modest complex on Boise's east side. Mrs. Chen from 2B was watching Emma, same as always when he had to work late. She met him at the door, her weathered face creased with concern. "You look terrible," she said in her blunt way. "The news said there was emergency landing. Your plane." "Yeah, everyone's fine." She studied him with eyes that had seen too much history to be fooled by simple words. "Emma's asleep. She did homework, ate dinner, no trouble. You need tea?" "I'm okay, Mrs. Chen, thank you." "You're not okay, but you're stubborn." She patted his arm. "She asked about her mother again tonight." Ryan's chest tightened. "What did you tell her?" "Same thing you tell her. Mama's an angel watching over her. But she's getting older, Ryan. Soon she'll want real answers." "I know." He pulled out his wallet, but Mrs. Chen waved him off. "Keep your money. Just take care of yourself. And that beautiful girl." After she left, Ryan stood in the doorway of Emma's room, watching her sleep. She'd kicked off her blankets as usual, one arm flung over her stuffed elephant. In the dim glow of her nightlight, she looked exactly like Sarah. Same dark curls, same determined set to her jaw even in sleep. Sarah, his wife, Emma's mother. The civilian nurse who'd volunteered for a forward operating base and died when a mortar round hit the medical tent. Emma had been too. She didn't remember her mother's voice or laugh or the way she hummed while cooking. All she had were photos and stories and the empty space where a mother should be. Ryan pulled the blanket over his daughter and kissed her forehead. She stirred, mumbled something about elephants, then settled back into sleep. In his own room, he stripped off the work shirt and caught sight of himself in the mirror. The scar on his forearm was the visible one, jagged white line from a piece of shrapnel that had torn through the cockpit when his F-16 took that final hit. But there were others, the ones across his ribs from the emergency extraction, the surgical scars on his left hand where they'd rebuilt the crushed bones and damaged nerves, and the ones nobody could see. Those were the deepest. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come easy. It never did after flying. His body remembered too much, the G-forces, the controlled violence of aerial combat, the split-second decisions that meant life or death. Tonight had brought it all back. The weight of the stick, the feel of an aircraft responding to his touch, the terrible clarity of emergency situations where there was no room for doubt. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but old habits died hard, and unknown numbers at night meant potential emergencies. Mercer. "Mr. Mercer, this is Amanda Voss with Channel 7 News. I'm doing a story on tonight's emergency landing, and several sources have indicated you played a crucial role in..." Ryan hung up, blocked the number, turned off his phone. So it was starting already. He finally fell asleep around midnight and dreamed of fire and falling and a voice on the radio saying, "I can't hold her, Ryan, I can't," before dissolving into static and screaming metal. He woke at 5 a.m., drenched in sweat, Emma standing beside his bed with worried eyes. "Daddy, you were making scary sounds." Ryan pulled her into a hug, his heart still racing. "Just a bad dream, sweetheart. I'm okay." Was it about the planes? She was too perceptive, this kid, too aware of the shadows that crossed his face sometimes. "Yeah, but it's gone now. Want to make pancakes?" Her face lit up. "With chocolate chips? Is there any other kind?" They moved through their morning routine with practiced ease. Emma chattered about school, about how her friend Zoe had gotten in trouble for talking during math, about the field trip next week to the Science Museum. Ryan listened and responded and tried to ignore the tension knotting his shoulders. His phone, when he finally turned it on, showed 17 missed calls and twice as many messages. Most were reporters. A few were from Crossair's corporate office. One was from Lena Cross, sent at 2 a.m. "We need to talk, please." He deleted it. After dropping Emma at school, she kissed his cheek and ran off without looking back, secure in the rhythm of normal days. Ryan drove to the Portland facility. It was a 3-hour drive from Boise, which gave him plenty of time to think about whether he still had a job. The maintenance hangar was buzzing when he arrived. Word had spread fast. Danny, one of the younger techs, spotted him first. Holy shit, Ryan. Dude, you're famous. I'm really not. Are you kidding? Martinez just showed me the flight recorder data. The hydraulics were completely shot. If you hadn't... Danny? Ryan kept his voice level. I helped. The pilots landed the plane, that's all there is to it. But Danny wasn't the only one. All morning people kept stopping him. Colleagues who'd barely spoken to him before, suddenly full of questions and backslaps and wide-eyed curiosity. The hangar supervisor, Bill Rodriguez, called him into the office. Sit down, Mercer. Bill was a gruff, 50-something former Navy mechanic who ran the facility with military precision. Got a call from corporate this morning. They want to fly you to Seattle for some kind of recognition ceremony. I'd rather not. Didn't think you would. Bill leaned back in his chair, studying Ryan with shrewd eyes. Also got a call from Ms. Cross herself. She wants to meet with you personally. Wouldn't say why, but she was pretty insistent. Ryan's jaw tightened. Sir, I just want to do my job. I know, and you're damn good at it. Bill tapped a pen against his desk. But here's the thing, Mercer. You saved the CEO's life. You saved a lot of lives. Like it or not, that changes things. It doesn't have to. In a perfect world, maybe. But this ain't a perfect world. Bill's expression softened. Look, I don't know your whole story. I know you flew fighters. I know you got hurt, and I know you want to be left alone. I respect that. But sometimes what we want and what we need aren't the same thing. Before Ryan could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Bill's secretary poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Cross is here. She's asking for Mr. Mercer. Ryan's stomach dropped. She's here? In Portland? Landed 20 minutes ago. She's in the conference room. Bill raised an eyebrow at Ryan. Your call. I can tell her you're busy. For a moment, Ryan considered it. Just walk away. Refuse the meeting. Keep his head down until the noise faded and he could go back to being invisible. But the image of Lena's face last night, the shock, the shame, the genuine remorse, wouldn't leave him alone. I'll see her, he said quietly, but only if it stays private. Done. The conference room was a sparse space with a table, 6 chairs, and a window overlooking the maintenance bay. Lena stood with her back to the door, watching the crew's work below. She'd traded yesterday's power suit for dark slacks and a simple blue blouse, her hair down instead of pulled back. She looked smaller somehow, more human. She turned when he entered. Thank you for seeing me. Ryan closed the door but didn't sit. You came a long way for a conversation. I owed you more than a phone call. She gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. He did, warily, keeping the table between them. Lena took a breath. I read your file. The real one. What happened during Operation Guardian Eagle? That file's supposed to be classified. I have security clearances for some of my government contracts. I made calls. She met his eyes. You and Captain Mitchell flew into a combat zone to extract 6 aid workers who'd been trapped when their convoy was ambushed. You were told to wait for backup. You went anyway. Ryan said nothing. The memory was right there, always right there. Sarah's voice on the satellite phone, terrified, saying they had maybe 10 minutes before the militants overran their position. The decision that wasn't really a decision at all. The extraction succeeded, Lena continued quietly, but your aircraft took heavy fire on the way out. Captain Mitchell, your wingman, was hit. You stayed with him, tried to talk him through an emergency landing, but his plane went down. You barely made it back yourself. You know the story. Why repeat it? Because I need you to understand that I know who you are now, what you sacrificed, what you lost. Moo. Her voice cracked slightly. One of those aid workers you saved was Sarah Mercer, your wife, Emma's mother. Ryan's hands clenched under the table. How did you... The mission reports, the casualty listings? Lena's eyes were bright. She died 3 months later in a mortar attack. You were stateside recovering from your injuries. You couldn't even attend her memorial service. Stop. The word came out harsh. Why are you doing this? Because yesterday I looked at you and saw a maintenance worker, someone beneath my notice. She leaned forward. But you're not that. You're a man who flew into hell to save people, including the woman you loved. A man who lost his career, his partner, his wife, and still gets up every morning to take care of his daughter and fix airplanes. You're a hero, Ryan, and I treated you like you were invisible. I am invisible. That's the point. Ryan stood abruptly. I don't want recognition. I don't want ceremonies or interviews or people looking at me like I'm special. I want to work in peace and raise my daughter without her seeing her father fall apart every time someone asks about the war. I understand. No, you don't. The words came out harder than he intended, but he was past caring. You understand success. You understand building empires and closing deals. But you don't understand what it's like to be the guy who survived when better people didn't. You don't understand waking up in the middle of the night because your 7-year-old is asking why she doesn't have a mommy like the other kids. You don't understand being so broken that the only thing keeping you functional is routine and simplicity and not thinking too hard about who you used to be. The silence that followed was heavy. Lena's face had gone pale. You're right, she said finally. I don't understand that, but I understand recognizing value too late. I understand realizing you've been measuring everything wrong. She stood, pulled a folder from her bag, and slid it across the table. This is a proposal. Hear me out before you say no. Ryan didn't touch the folder. What kind of proposal? Crossair Solutions has contracts with 3 airlines and 2 government agencies. We consult on safety protocols, maintenance standards, emergency procedures, but we're missing something crucial. Real operational insight from people who've actually lived through the worst-case scenarios. She tapped the folder. I want to create a new division, flight safety and emergency response training led by people with real experience. Former military pilots, test pilots, emergency responders, people who know what it means when the manual doesn't cover the situation you're in. And you want me to run it. I want you to help build it. Consulting position, your own hours, salary 3 times what you're making now. You'd work with training programs, review emergency protocols, maybe teach seminars. Nothing public unless you choose it. No media circuses. Just using what you know to help keep people safe. Ryan stared at the folder. Why? Because yesterday showed me I've been building this company on incomplete information. I need people who understand the human element. People who've faced real emergencies and know that textbooks don't save lives. Experience and instinct do. She paused. And because I think maybe you need this too. A way to use what you learned without having to fly again. A way to honor what you lost by making sure fewer people have to lose what you did. The words hit deeper than Ryan wanted to admit. He thought about Emma, about the conversation they'd have someday when she asked what her mother had died for. Thought about Captain Mitchell's family, about the weight of survivors' guilt that never quite lifted. I can't be your poster boy, he said quietly. I can't do press conferences or inspirational speeches. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to do what you did yesterday. Step in when it matters and help people survive. Lena's voice was earnest now, stripped of corporate polish. Look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a terrible idea and you'll be happier changing oil and replacing landing gear, but I don't think so. I think you're dying inside trying to be invisible when everything about you is built to lead and protect and save. Ryan closed his eyes, saw the cockpit again, felt the controls respond to his hands, remembered the surge of purpose that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. It had terrified him. But underneath the fear was something else, something he'd thought was dead, a sense of meaning. I need to think about it, he said. Of course, take all the time you need. Lena pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. That's my personal cell. Call me when you're ready to talk. Or if you're ready to tell me to go to hell, either way. She headed for the door, then paused. Ryan? Yesterday you said you're not who you used to be. Maybe that's true. But whoever you are now saved my life and the lives of 17 other people. That person matters, whether you believe it or not. After she left, Ryan sat alone in the conference room for a long time, staring at the folder. Finally, he opened it. The proposal was detailed, professional, and exactly what she'd described, but tucked in the back was something else, a handwritten note on Lena's personal stationery. I spent 12 years learning how to build a company. You spent 5 years learning how to survive. I think together we could build something that actually matters. Give me a chance to do better. Give yourself a chance to heal. L. Ryan folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. He didn't call her that day, or the next. He went back to work, to the familiar rhythm of diagnostics and repairs and the comfortable anonymity of grease and metal. But the folder stayed in his truck, and the note stayed in his pocket, and at night when Emma was asleep, he'd take it out and read it again. By the third day, the media frenzy had mostly died down. Captain Reeves had given a press conference crediting expert teamwork and standard emergency protocols. Crosshair's PR team issued a statement praising their safety culture. Ryan's name appeared in exactly 2 news articles, buried in the details, easy to miss. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt restless. On Friday evening, Mrs. Chen came over to watch Emma while Ryan attended a parent-teacher conference at school. Emma's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, was young and enthusiastic and clearly loved her job. "Emma's doing wonderfully," she said, showing Ryan samples of his daughter's work. "Her reading is above grade level and she's showing real aptitude for science, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" "She's very reserved. She has friends, but she keeps herself separate somehow, like she's afraid to fully engage." Ms. Rodriguez chose her words carefully. "I know she lost her mother very young, and I know you work hard to provide for her, but I wonder if she might benefit from, I don't know, seeing you more fully in the world? Right now, she sees Daddy, who works a lot and comes home tired. Maybe if she could see what you're capable of, what you've accomplished." The words echoed in Ryan's head all the way home. What was Emma learning from watching him shrink himself down, making his world smaller and smaller until it was just work and home and nothing else? That night, after putting Emma to bed, Ryan pulled out his phone and Lena's business card. She answered on the second ring. "Ryan? The proposal. I have conditions." He heard the smile in her voice. "I'm listening." "No media, no public appearances unless I agree to them. And I need flexible hours. Emma comes first, always." "Agreed. Anything else?" "Yeah." Ryan took a breath. "I want to meet the other people you're bringing into this division. I need to know they're serious, that this isn't just some PR stunt." "I haven't recruited anyone else yet. I was waiting to see if you'd say yes. You're the foundation, Ryan. I can't build this without you." The trust in those words, the weight of being essential rather than invisible, settled over him like a mantle he'd forgotten he used to wear. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's do it." "Really?" "Really. But Lena, if this goes wrong, if it turns into a circus, or if it's not what you're selling, I'm out. No hard feelings, but I walk." "Understood. I'll have the contracts drawn up by Monday. We can—" She stopped. "Thank you, Ryan. You won't regret this." After hanging up, Ryan sat in the dark living room, his heart beating faster than it had in years, scared, uncertain, but also, for the first time since the crash, something like hopeful. He walked to Emma's room and stood in the doorway again, watching her sleep. When she woke up tomorrow, he'd still be the same dad who made pancakes and helped with homework. But maybe, he could also start being the dad who showed her that surviving wasn't the same as living, that the broken pieces of a person could be reassembled into something new and still valuable. Through Emma's window, he could see the night sky, stars scattered across the darkness like navigation points. He'd spent so many years up there, trusting his life to instruments and instinct and the vast empty spaces between earth and heaven. Now he was trusting something harder, the possibility that his life could have purpose again. That the worst things that happened to him didn't have to be the end of his story. The sky had taken everything from him once. Maybe it was time to take something back. 3 months passed like water through fingers, fast enough to feel momentous. Slow enough that Ryan sometimes wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The new division, officially named Flight Safety Operations, occupied a renovated section of Crosshair's Seattle headquarters. Ryan had insisted on keeping his apartment in Boise, commuting twice a week while maintaining his maintenance certification. Emma had adjusted better than he'd expected, proud to tell her friends that her daddy was teaching people how to be safe in airplanes, even if she didn't fully understand what that meant. Lena had kept every promise. No media circus. No forced spotlight. Just quiet, methodical work building something that mattered. They'd recruited carefully. Maria Santos, former Coast Guard helicopter pilot who'd flown rescue missions in conditions that would ground commercial aircraft. James Park, ex-Navy test pilot with a PhD in aeronautical engineering. Denise Crawford, retired air traffic controller who'd talked down 3 emergency landings during her career. Each of them carried the same weight Ryan did, the knowledge of what happened when everything went wrong, and the only thing standing between people and disaster was skill and nerve. This morning, Ryan sat in the division's conference room reviewing training protocols for a major airline's emergency response team. The Seattle skyline stretched beyond the windows, gray and drizzling in typical Pacific Northwest fashion. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he barely noticed. The door opened. Lena entered carrying her own coffee and a tablet. Over the past months, their professional relationship had developed an easy rhythm. She trusted his expertise. He respected her vision. The awkwardness of that first conversation had faded into something more comfortable. "Morning," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "How's the United Airlines protocol looking?" "Solid, mostly. I want Maria to review the water landing procedures. She's got more practical experience with that than any of us. And I think we need to add a section on passenger management during extended emergencies. The psychological component gets overlooked." Lena made notes on her tablet. "Agreed. I'll set up a meeting with their training director for next week." She paused. "Also, I got an interesting call this morning. Senator Richard Vance's office. He's on the Transportation Committee, wants to discuss our work for potential FAA integration." Ryan's pen stopped moving. FAA integration means congressional hearings, public testimony. "I know. I told them we'd consider it." She met his eyes. "But this is your call, Ryan. If you're not comfortable, it's not about comfort. It's about whether we can actually make a difference or if it's just politicians looking for a photo op." Vance has a solid record on aviation safety. Lost his sister in a commuter plane crash 15 years ago. From what I understand, it's personal for him. Ryan considered this. Personal meant genuine interest, but it also meant emotion, and emotion in policy discussions could cut either way. "Let me think about it." "Take your time. The meeting's not for another month." Lena stood to leave, then hesitated. "How's Emma doing?" The question surprised him. Lena asked occasionally, but always with a careful respect for boundaries. "Good. She's in a school play next week. Something about astronauts." "You gonna make it?" "Wouldn't miss it." Lena smiled, and something in it reminded Ryan of how much she'd changed over these months. The razor-sharp CEO who'd dismissed him in that first-class cabin had softened somehow, become more present. She still drove her company with fierce intelligence, but there was warmth now beneath the competence. Humanity. After she left, Ryan returned to his protocols, but his concentration was fractured. The mention of the FAA had triggered old anxieties. Public testimony meant exposure, cameras, questions about his service record, the thing he'd been avoiding for 5 years, suddenly inevitable if he wanted to scale the work they were doing. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Conference room 2B, now, emergency." Ryan's blood went cold. Emergency in their context meant only one thing. He found Maria, James, and Denise gathered around a monitor showing a live news feed. The chyron read, "Breaking, passenger jet loses contact over North Pacific." "Transglobal Flight 8221, Maria said, without looking away from the screen. "Seattle to Tokyo, Boeing 737. Lost radio contact 40 minutes ago. Last position was about 800 miles west of the coast." Ryan's mind immediately shifted into crisis mode. "Crew?" "Captain Amy Zhao, First Officer David Mendez, both solid pilots, good records, 312 passengers." "Weather in the area?" James pulled up a meteorological map. "Severe storm system, wind shear, heavy turbulence. They were trying to navigate around it when contact was lost." The news anchor was interviewing an aviation expert, speculation running wild, equipment failure, possible structural damage, the word nobody wanted to say, crash. "Are we getting called in?" Denise asked. "Not officially," Ryan said, "but I know Amy Zhao. Flew with her brother in the Air Force. If there's anything we can do." His phone rang. "Lena." "You're watching?" she asked. "Yeah. Transglobal's CEO just called me. They want our team on standby." If the plane is still airborne and manages to re-establish contact, they might need emergency consultation. We're ready. Ryan looked at his team. I'm sending Maria and James to Transglobal's operations center. Denise, you coordinate with air traffic control. I'll stay here and monitor. Ryan. Lena's voice was tense. The board of directors are on their way to Seattle. If this turns into a recovery operation, they're going to want answers. They're going to want to know why we didn't see this coming. We can't predict mechanical failures or weather events. We can only prepare people to respond. I know, but that won't stop them from looking for someone to blame. After hanging up, Ryan spent the next 2 hours in controlled hell. Every news update brought more speculation, more fear. Social media erupted with passenger manifests, people searching for loved ones. The Coast Guard had deployed search aircraft, but in that vast expanse of ocean, finding anything would take a miracle. Then, at 2:47 p.m., the miracle happened. "They've made contact," James shouted from his laptop. "Partial radio transmission. The plane is still airborne." Ryan was beside him in 3 strides. On the screen, a Coast Guard transmission was being replayed. Mayday, Mayday. Transglobal 821, multiple system failures. Attempting, return to, fuel critical. The signal dissolved into static, but it was enough. They were alive. Damaged, desperate, but alive. Ryan's phone exploded with calls. Transglobal, the FAA. News outlets who'd somehow gotten his number. He ignored them all, except one. "This is Captain Zhao." The voice was strained, distorted by interference, but functional. "We've got a situation. Lightning strike took out primary navigation and damaged the right engine. We're flying on instruments and prayers. Fuel consumption is way higher than normal. The damaged engine is burning inefficiently. We need options for emergency landing, and we need them fast." Ryan pulled up maps, calculations spinning through his mind with the speed of long training. Nearest suitable airport is Anchorage, but that's 1,400 miles northeast. Can you make it? Not with current fuel consumption. We'll be swimming before we reach Alaska. What about the Aleutian Islands? Shemya has a runway long enough for a 767. Check that. We'd have to fight headwinds the whole way. Same problem. Ryan's mind raced through alternatives, each one worse than the last. Then it hit him. What if you didn't try to reach land? Static filled the line for 3 heartbeats. Say again? There's a protocol for controlled water landings. We've been developing it for exactly this scenario. If you can find relatively calm water and bring her down at the right angle and speed, the 707's fuselage can stay intact long enough for evacuation. You're talking about ditching in the Pacific Ocean. Amy's voice was flat with disbelief. I'm talking about keeping 300 people alive when there are no good options left. Ryan was already pulling up the training materials they'd developed, the simulations Maria had run. "Captain, I flew combat missions where coming home meant doing impossible things. This is possible. Difficult, dangerous, but possible." Another long pause. In the background, Ryan could hear alarms, urgent voices, the chaos of a dying aircraft. "All right, walk me through it." For the next 90 minutes, Ryan became Amy's lifeline. He coordinated with Maria, who'd reached Transglobal's operations center and was feeding real-time data on ocean conditions. James modeled fuel consumption and flight paths, calculating the optimal ditching location. Denise worked with air traffic control to clear all traffic from the area and position Coast Guard assets for immediate rescue. Lena appeared at some point, coffee in hand, watching silently as Ryan guided a pilot he'd never met through the most dangerous maneuver in aviation. "You need to configure for minimum sink rate," Ryan said into his headset. "Flaps 30, gear up. You want to touch down at exactly 120 knots. Any faster and you'll break apart, any slower and you'll stall." "Copy that. Current speed is 140, reducing." "How are the passengers?" "Scared. Flight attendants have them in brace positions. We've briefed on evacuation procedures." Amy's voice cracked slightly. "Ryan, some of these people have kids." "I know." He thought of Emma, of what it would mean if he were the one in that cockpit. "That's why you're going to bring them home. Listen to me, Amy. I've seen pilots do incredible things under worse conditions. You have the skill. You have the aircraft. All you need is the nerve. And I know you've got that." "How do you know?" Because you're still flying. Because you're still fighting. That's all that matters. The final approach began at 4:23 p.m. Every news network in the world was broadcasting, though none of them had footage, just radar tracks and breathless commentary. Ryan had stopped noticing. His entire world had narrowed to Amy's voice, the data streams on his screen, and the mental calculations of angles and speeds, and the razor-thin margin between survival and catastrophe. "I have visual on the water," Amy reported. "Swells are about 8 feet. Is that manageable?" Ryan checked with Maria. She nodded grimly. "It's rough, but we've simulated worse. You want to land parallel to the swell direction to minimize impact." "Parallel to swells, understood. Altitude 2,000 feet, speed 130. "Too fast. You need to bleed off another 10 knots. Bleeding speed 125, 122. The entire operations center had gone silent. 30 people watching screens, holding their breath, as a massive aircraft descended toward the cold Pacific with 300 lives depending on a maneuver that existed mostly in theory. 500 feet, Amy said. Her voice had gone calm, the eerie calm of pilots who'd accepted the mission and let training override fear. 400, 300, speed 120, committing to landing. Ryan closed his eyes, but not in prayer, in visualization. He'd done this himself 1,000 times, bringing damaged aircraft down to surfaces that wanted to kill him. The skill never left, just waited dormant until the moment demanded it. 200 feet, flare initiated. 150? The impact, when it came, could be heard even through the radio, a massive grinding crash as aluminum met water at 120 miles per hour, screaming, tearing metal. Then Amy's voice, ragged but alive. "We're down. Aircraft is intact. Initiating emergency evacuation." The operations center erupted in shouts and applause. Someone was crying. Maria grabbed Ryan's shoulder, squeezing hard. But Ryan didn't celebrate. Not yet. "Amy, talk to me. What's your situation?" "Forward fuselage is breached. We're taking on water fast, deploying emergency slides. Coast Guard, how long until you reach us?" A new voice cut in. "Transglobal 821. This is Coast Guard Rescue 62. We have you visual. ETA to your position is 4 minutes. Choppers are inbound behind us." 4 minutes. Ryan pulled up the data on 707 flotation capabilities. In cold water with a hull breach, they had maybe 10 minutes before the aircraft went under. It was going to be close. For those 4 minutes, time became elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that defied physics. Ryan listened to Amy directing evacuation, her crew working with desperate efficiency to get passengers onto life rafts and into the water. Coast Guard cutters arrived, their rescue swimmers hitting the water before the boats fully stopped. Helicopters thundered overhead, pulling people from the ocean in baskets and harnesses. Through it all, Ryan stayed on the line, a voice in the dark assuring Amy that help was coming, that she was doing everything right, that just a few minutes more. Hold on. At 4:51 p.m., 28 minutes after touchdown, Amy Zhao was the last person pulled from Transglobal Flight 821. 40 seconds later, the aircraft slipped beneath the waves, its tail section the last thing to disappear. 312 passengers, 15 crew members, every single one accounted for. Alive. Ryan pulled off his headset and sat back, his entire body shaking. Around him, people were laughing and hugging, the relief palpable. But all he could think about was how close it had been, how many things could have gone wrong, how easily this could have been a memorial service instead of a miracle. Lena was suddenly there, crouching beside his chair. "Ryan, you did it. You saved them." "Amy saved them. I just talked." "You did a hell of a lot more than talk." She handed him a bottle of water. "The FAA is calling. So is the White House. This is going to be everywhere." And just like that, the cage he'd spent 5 years building around himself shattered completely. The media storm that followed made the Boise emergency landing look like a footnote. By the next morning, Ryan's face was on every news channel, his name trending worldwide. The story had everything: disaster, heroism, impossible odds overcome. Reporters camped outside his apartment. His phone became unusable. Emma's school had to hire security to keep journalists from harassing a 7-year-old about her hero father. Ryan retreated into himself, but there was nowhere to hide. The world wanted answers, wanted interviews, wanted to touch the man who'd talked a dying plane out of the sky. Senator Vance's office called 6 times in one day. The president invited him to the White House. A major publisher offered 7 figures for his memoir. He refused everything. On the 3rd day, Lena found him in his office at midnight, staring at Emma's school play invitation on his desk. The performance was tomorrow. He had no idea if he could even get there through the mob of reporters. "Talk to me," Lena said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I can't do this. I can't be what they want me to be." "What do they want you to be?" "A hero. A symbol. Someone who makes them feel safe." Ryan's hands clenched. "But I'm not safe. I'm a guy who watched his best friend die because we made a choice to save people, and that choice had consequences. I'm a father who can barely hold it together some nights. I'm broken, Lena. Heroes aren't supposed to be broken." She was quiet for a long moment, then pulled up a chair beside him. "You know what I see when I look at you? Not a hero, a human being who keeps choosing to help people even when it costs him everything. That's not about being unbreakable. It's about breaking and still choosing to stand." "I don't want this attention. I never wanted it." "I know. But those 327 people on that plane, they wanted to live. And they're alive because you were willing to step up when it mattered." She reached over and tapped Emma's invitation. "She's going to see all this? The news coverage, the recognition. What do you want her to learn from it?" Ryan thought about Miss Rodriguez's words months ago, about Emma needing to see him fully in the world, about what it meant to survive versus what it meant to live. "I want her to learn that you don't have to be fearless to be brave," he said slowly. "That being scared is okay, as long as you don't let it stop you from doing what's right." "Then show her," Lena stood. "Come to work tomorrow. Face the cameras if you have to. Do the interviews or don't. That's your choice. But don't hide. Not anymore. These people need to see that heroes are just humans who chose not to give up. And you need to see that broken pieces can still make something beautiful." After she left, Ryan sat alone with his thoughts and his fears and the weight of expectations he'd never asked for. Outside his window, Seattle glittered in the dark, millions of lives intersecting in ways big and small. 327 of those lives existed tonight because he'd chosen to answer the phone, because he'd trusted his training and his instincts and the belief that survival was always worth fighting for. Maybe Lena was right. Maybe being broken wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the middle, and what came next depended on whether he had the courage to keep writing. He picked up his phone and called Mrs. Chen. "Can you watch Emma tomorrow afternoon? I have something I need to do." The next day, Ryan held a press conference. He kept it short, kept it honest. Yes, he'd helped coordinate the emergency landing. Yes, his military background had been useful. No, he wasn't a hero, just someone with relevant experience who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The real heroes were Captain Zhao and her crew, the Coast Guard rescue teams, the passengers who'd stayed calm in impossible circumstances. When reporters pressed for details about his service record, about Operation Guardian Eagle, about his wife, he looked directly into the cameras and said simply, "I lost people I loved because we chose to help strangers. I live with that every day. What happened this week reminded me that those choices still matter. That sometimes the worst things we survive teach us how to help others survive. That's all I have to say about it." He left the podium to shouted questions, but he'd said what needed saying. That evening, he sat in the front row of Emma's school auditorium, watching his daughter, dressed in a cardboard rocket ship, deliver her one line about exploring the stars. She was nervous, stumbling slightly over the words, but she got through it. And when it was over and she took her bow, her eyes found his in the crowd. The pride in her smile could have lit the universe. Afterward, in the parking lot, she grabbed his hand and said, "Daddy, everyone at school says you're famous now." "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just did my job." "Miss Rodriguez says you saved a whole airplane full of people." Ryan knelt down so they were eye to eye. "A lot of people worked together to save that airplane. I was just one of them." "But you were brave." He thought about the shaking hands, the nightmares, the fear that never quite went away. Sometimes being brave just means being scared and doing it anyway. Emma considered this with the gravity only children could muster. Like when I was scared to be in the play, but I did it anyway? Exactly like that. Ryan pulled her into a hug. I'm so proud of you, Emma. Not because you were perfect, but because you tried. As they drove home through the Seattle traffic, Emma chattering about the play and her friends and whether they could get ice cream, Ryan felt something shift inside him. The weight was still there, the loss, the guilt, the scars. But for the first time in 5 years, it didn't feel crushing. It felt like ballast, something that kept him grounded instead of dragging him under. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Saw the press conference? Perfect. Also, Senator Vance wants to meet next week. Still your call. Ryan typed back. Set it up. Time to see if we can actually make a difference. The sky had broken him once, had taken his partner, his wife, his career. Had left him with scars that would never fully heal, and a daughter who would grow up without the mother she deserved. But the sky had also given him purpose, had reminded him that survival meant more than just breathing, that the pieces of a broken life could be reassembled into something that still mattered. Flight 821 proved that. 327 people proved that. And maybe, just maybe, Emma would grow up knowing that her father wasn't perfect, wasn't fearless, wasn't unbreakable. But he never stopped trying to save people anyway. The week after Flight 821 felt like living in someone else's life. Ryan woke each morning to find his story retold in 100 different voices, each version sanding down the rough edges until he barely recognized himself. The scared father who'd spent 5 years hiding became the reluctant hero who emerged from obscurity. His oil-stained hands became the hands that saved 300 lives. Even his refusal of interviews was reframed as humble nobility, as if choosing privacy was somehow more heroic than the actual work. Captain Amy Zhao called him on Thursday. Her voice still carried the rasp of someone who'd screamed evacuation orders for 20 straight minutes while the Pacific Ocean swallowed her aircraft. I need to say thank you, she said, face to face, not through a phone. They met at a quiet coffee shop in downtown Seattle, chosen specifically because it was the kind of place where nobody looked up from their laptops long enough to recognize anyone. Amy arrived wearing civilian clothes and sunglasses despite the gray drizzle outside. She looked smaller than her voice had suggested, maybe 5'4", with graying hair pulled back and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who'd stared down death and won by the thinnest margin. She sat down across from Ryan and just looked at him for a long moment. You sounded taller on the radio, she said finally. Ryan almost smiled. You sounded calmer. Yeah, well, training kicks in, you know. Doesn't mean the terror goes away, just means you can work through it. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was still trying to get warm. My first officer, David, he's got 3 kids. Keeps crying at random moments now. His wife says he wakes up in the middle of the night checking to make sure he's still breathing. That's normal. The delayed response. Sometimes the fear doesn't hit until you're safe enough to feel it. Amy studied him with the sharp assessment of someone trained to read situations quickly. You talk like you know. I do. The news mentioned you were Air Force, fighter pilot. They didn't say much else. Ryan took a sip of coffee, buying time. He'd gotten good at deflecting these conversations, but something about Amy's directness made the usual evasions feel dishonest. She'd earned truth by living through hell. I was deployed in Afghanistan, he said quietly. Flew close air support and rescue missions. My last mission went bad. My wingman didn't make it home. I'm sorry. Me too. He met her eyes. But that's why I knew you could do it. Land that plane. Because I've seen what happens when pilots don't give up. When they fly the aircraft all the way to the ground, even when the ground is coming up way too fast. Amy was quiet, processing this. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with ordinary life. Students studying, couples talking, someone complaining about their boss. The mundane beauty of survival. The families have been calling, Amy said. The passengers. They want to meet me, thank me. Some of them are putting together some kind of event, recognition ceremony. She grimaced. I don't know how to do that. Stand up in front of 300 people and accept gratitude for not killing them. So don't. What? Don't accept it alone. You had a crew. You had air traffic control, Coast Guard, support teams. Hell, you had passengers who stayed calm when everything in their bodies was screaming panic. Make it about all of them. Ryan leaned forward. The spotlight's going to find you whether you want it or not, Amy, but you get to choose what you do with it. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Will you come? To the ceremony? I know you hate the attention, but I think the families would want to meet you. The voice that kept them alive. Ryan's first instinct was to refuse, but he thought about what Lena had said, about choosing to stand instead of hide, about what Emma needed to see. When is it? 2 weeks. They're holding it at the Maritime Museum. Low-key, just families and crew. No media unless someone wants to talk to them. Amy's expression softened. I know what I'm asking, but you were in that cockpit with me, even if you were 1,000 miles away. You deserve to see the faces of the people who are alive because of you. Ryan agreed, even as his stomach tightened with dread. The media attention did eventually fade, as it always did when the next crisis demanded the world's shrinking attention span. By the second week, Ryan could walk through Seattle without being recognized, could take Emma to the park without cameras following. The relief was immense. What didn't fade was the opportunity. Senator Vance's office scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. Lena briefed Ryan extensively, providing background on the senator's legislative priorities, his committee positions, his record on aviation safety. But she also pulled Ryan aside the night before with different advice. Don't try to be political, she said. They were in her office, the Seattle skyline lit up behind her. These people deal with bullshit all day. What they need is someone who'll tell them the truth about what actually happens when systems fail. Be yourself. That's more powerful than any pitch I could write. Being myself got me exactly nowhere for 5 years. Being invisible got you nowhere. Being yourself saved 300 people. She handed him a folder. These are the current FAA proposals on emergency response training. They're inadequate. The guidelines are written by bureaucrats who've never felt an aircraft come apart under them. You can change that, but only if you're willing to walk into that room and make them uncomfortable. Ryan opened the folder, scanning the dense regulatory language. Lena was right. It read like it had been written by committee, with enough hedging and qualifications to avoid any real commitment to meaningful change. What do you think they'll ask me? Everything. Your service record, your expertise, your opinion on current standards. But mostly, they'll want to know if you think regulation can actually prevent another Flight 821. She paused. What will you tell them? The truth. That regulation helps, but what saves lives is people who know what to do when the regulations don't cover the situation you're in. That's what training should focus on, not just following procedures, but understanding why those procedures exist so you can adapt when everything goes wrong. Lena smiled. See? You're already better at this than half the consultants I've worked with. The meeting with Senator Vance took place in a conference room that smelled like old wood and leather-bound law books. The senator himself was younger than Ryan expected, maybe 50, with steel gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent serious time outdoors before politics claimed him. His handshake was firm, his eyes direct. Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming. I know this isn't your favorite arena. No, sir, it's not. But if it leads to better safety standards, it's worth the discomfort. Vance gestured to the table where 2 other people sat. A woman introduced as Dr. Patricia Morrison from the FAA, and a man named Gerald Kemp, who apparently represented airline industry interests. The battle lines were already drawn in their seating positions. I'll cut to the chase, Vance said, settling into his chair. Flight 821 exposed serious gaps in our emergency response capabilities. Dr. Morrison here believes current FAA guidelines are sufficient, and the incident was an outlier. Mr. Kemp believes additional training mandates would be prohibitively expensive for airlines. I believe they're both more concerned with covering their asses than with saving lives, but I try to remain diplomatic. He smiled without humor. I'm hoping you can provide some clarity. Dr. Morrison bristled. Senator, that's hardly fair. Fair would be asking the families of those 300 passengers if they think our current standards are adequate. Vance turned to Ryan. What's your assessment? Ryan had prepared for political dancing, for careful phrasing and diplomatic hedging. Instead, he found himself responding to the senator's directness with his own. The current guidelines assume emergencies follow predictable patterns, but real crises don't read the manual. Flight 821 survived because Captain Zhao had the judgment to recognize that standard procedures wouldn't work, and the courage to trust guidance from someone outside her immediate chain of command. That kind of adaptive thinking isn't in the FAA handbook, and it can't be regulated into existence. It has to be trained. What kind of training? Dr. Morrison asked, her tone skeptical. Scenario-based? High stress? Using people who've actually lived through catastrophic failures to teach crews how to think, not just what to think. Ryan pulled out his tablet, showing simulation data his team had compiled. We ran scenarios with active pilots, gave them situations where standard procedures were compromised or unavailable. 70% failed to adapt quickly enough. The 30% who succeeded? They were all pilots with either military experience or prior emergency experience. They'd learned to improvise under pressure. Gerald Kemp leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, I don't doubt the value of advanced training, but the cost of implementing what you're describing across every commercial airline would run into hundreds of millions. That's not sustainable. You know what else isn't sustainable? Billion-dollar lawsuits after preventable crashes. Destroyed aircraft, lost lives. Ryan met his eyes steadily. I'm not suggesting every pilot needs combat training. I'm suggesting we stop treating emergency procedures like a checklist and start treating them like a mindset. That doesn't require massive infrastructure. It requires good instructors and realistic scenarios. Vance was making notes. How does your division at Crossair approach this? For the next hour, Ryan walked them through flight safety operations methodology, the use of veteran pilots as instructors, the psychological components of crisis management, the importance of crew resource management when leadership structures broke down. He showed them data, presented case studies, and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned expertise through survival. Dr. Morrison asked sharp questions, probing for weaknesses. Kemp kept circling back to costs, but Vance listened with the intensity of someone genuinely trying to understand, occasionally asking questions that suggested he'd done his homework. Finally, the senator sat back. Mr. Mercer, let me be blunt. I'm planning to introduce legislation that would mandate enhanced emergency response training for all commercial pilots. The FAA will fight it because it challenges their existing guidelines. The airlines will fight it because it costs money. I'll need expert testimony to make the case. He paused. Would you be willing to testify before the Transportation Committee? Ryan's throat tightened. Congressional testimony meant C-SPAN cameras, official transcripts. His words entered into the permanent record. It meant exposure at a level that would make the Flight 821 media circus look trivial. But it also meant the possibility of actually changing things, of taking the worst moments of his life and using them to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Yes, he said. I'll testify. Vance smiled for the first time since the meeting started. Good. I'll have my staff coordinate with you on scheduling. Fair warning, it won't be pleasant. You'll be questioned by people who've never flown anything more complex than a helicopter tour over the Grand Canyon, and they'll act like they know better than you. You'll need patience. I spent years in the military, Senator. I'm familiar with being questioned by people who don't know what they're talking about. Vance laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise everyone in the room. I think we're going to get along just fine, Mr. Mercer. As Ryan left the building, Lena was waiting in her car. She'd insisted on driving him, sensing he'd need someone to decompress with afterward. How'd it go? She asked as he climbed in. I committed to congressional testimony. She pulled into traffic, processing this. How do you feel about that? Terrified, but it's the right thing. He looked out the window at the government buildings sliding past. Vance is serious. He actually wants to change things, not just score political points. Those are rare in this town. His sister died in a plane crash. He told me about it afterward, off the record. She was 23, coming home from college for Christmas. Commuter flight went down in bad weather. The pilot was experienced but had never trained for severe icing conditions. Vance said if someone had taught that pilot how to recognize the danger signs earlier, she might still be alive. Lena was quiet. So this is personal for him. Everything important is personal for someone. Ryan thought about Sarah, about Captain Mitchell, about all the names on the memorial walls he tried not to visit. That's what people forget. Statistics are just people with the names worn off. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Lena spoke again. The family's ceremony is this Saturday. Are you ready? No, but I'm going anyway. The Maritime Museum sat on the Seattle waterfront, a modern building of glass and steel that somehow managed to honor the past while looking toward the future. Ryan arrived early, at Lena's suggestion, to avoid the crowd. Emma was with Mrs. Chen for the day. He'd tried to explain where he was going, but how do you tell a 7-year-old that you're meeting people you saved without making it sound like you're special? Amy found him standing by a window overlooking Elliott Bay, watching ferries cut white lines through gray water. You came, she said, sounding relieved. Said I would. I know, but saying and doing are different things, especially for something like this. She stood beside him, both of them looking out at the water. I've met about 50 families so far. They keep thanking me. Some of them cry. One woman gave me a photo album of her grandkids, said she gets to watch them grow up because of what we did. I don't know how to carry that. You don't carry it. You just acknowledge it and keep living. Ryan turned to face her. The weight doesn't get lighter, Amy. You just get stronger. The ceremony started at 2 p.m. The museum had set up a private gallery, closing it to the public for the afternoon. Around 200 people filled the space, passengers, their families, the flight crew, rescue personnel. Ryan stood in the back, hoping to remain unnoticed, but Amy had other plans. When she gave her remarks, she called him forward. There's someone here who needs to be recognized, she said, her voice carrying through the quiet space. Ryan Mercer never got on our plane. He was 1,000 miles away. But when we needed help, he was there. His voice in my headset guiding me through procedures I'd never even heard of, keeping me calm when everything was falling apart. If you want to thank someone for being alive today, thank him. 300 faces turned toward Ryan. The applause started slowly, then built into something overwhelming. People were standing, some crying, reaching out to touch his hand as he made his way to the front. An elderly man gripped his shoulder and said, "You saved my daughter." A young mother held up a baby, maybe 6 months old, and said, "She gets to know her father because of you." Ryan stood at the front of the room, these strangers' gratitude washing over him like a tide, and felt something crack open inside. For 5 years, he'd carried guilt like armor, convinced that survivor's remorse was the price of breath, that living when others died meant owing an unpayable debt. But these people, they were alive. Not because he was perfect or fearless or unbroken, because when it mattered, he'd chosen to help instead of hide. When Amy handed him the microphone, his hands were shaking. "I'm not good at speeches," he started. "I'm better with aircraft systems than people. But I want you to understand something. What happened with Flight 821 wasn't about one person being heroic. It was about a lot of people doing their jobs under impossible circumstances. Captain Zhao and her crew kept that plane in the air. The Coast Guard pulled you from the ocean. Air traffic control cleared the way. Maintenance teams had kept that aircraft safe for thousands of flights before that day. I just connected some dots." "You saved our lives," someone called out. Ryan shook his head. "You saved your own lives by staying calm, by trusting your crew, by helping each other evacuate in freezing water when everything in your body was screaming panic. That's the real heroism, not the dramatic stuff. The quiet choice to keep going when giving up would be easier." He handed the microphone back to Amy and tried to retreat, but the families wouldn't let him. They surrounded him, shaking hands, hugging, sharing stories. A teenage girl told him she wanted to be a pilot now. A businessman said he'd started volunteering with veteran support organizations because Ryan's story inspired him. An older woman simply held his hand and cried, unable to speak through her gratitude. Lena found him 2 hours later, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. She didn't ask if he was okay. She knew him well enough by now to read the complicated mix of emotions on his face. "Ready to go?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so." As they walked to her car, Ryan looked back at the museum. Through the windows, he could see the families still gathered, still talking, still celebrating the gift of continued existence. 327 people whose futures had almost ended in the Pacific Ocean, 327 sets of dreams and hopes and ordinary days that almost never happened. Thank you, he said to Lena. For what? For seeing something in me I'd forgotten was there, for pushing me when I wanted to stay invisible, he struggled for the words, for reminding me that broken doesn't mean useless. Lena smiled, but there was something complicated in it. You're welcome. But Ryan? You did that yourself. I just held the door open. You're the one who chose to walk through it. That night, after Emma was asleep, Ryan stood in his apartment looking at the things that defined his life. The photos of Sarah, forever young and smiling. Emma's school drawings covering the refrigerator. His Air Force memorabilia packed in boxes in the closet where he didn't have to see it every day. The maintenance manuals and technical journals that had become his refuge. 5 years of making himself smaller, of choosing safety over significance, of believing that the best he could do was survive without causing more damage. But the past months had taught him something different. That survival without purpose was just slow dying. That the scars he carried didn't disqualify him from making a difference. They were exactly what qualified him. That Emma deserved to see a father who chose courage over comfort, even when courage meant standing in front of strangers and accepting their gratitude for simply doing what needed to be done. He pulled out his phone and texted Lena. Tell Senator Vance I'm ready. Let's change some things. Her response came immediately. Already scheduled. Committee hearing is in 3 weeks. And Ryan, I'm proud of you. 3 words that shouldn't have mattered so much, but did. Because for the first time in 5 years, Ryan was starting to be proud of himself too. Not for being perfect or fearless, not for being unbroken or unmarred by loss, but for choosing every single day to stand back up. To use what he'd learned in the worst moments of his life to help others avoid the same fate. To show his daughter that strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The sky had taken everything from him once. But he was taking something back. Not revenge, not reclamation of what was lost, but something new. Purpose. Connection. The understanding that his story wasn't over just because the hardest chapters had been written. Outside his window, Seattle glowed in the darkness, millions of lights marking millions of lives, each one carrying their own weight, their own losses, their own choices about what to do with the broken pieces. Ryan was finally ready to do something meaningful with his, and 327 people were alive to see him try. The 3 weeks before the congressional hearing passed in a blur of preparation and doubt. Ryan spent his days drilling with Lena and her team, anticipating hostile questions, learning the political landscape of aviation safety reform. His nights were different. Those belonged to Emma, to normalcy, to the careful balance of being a father who was slowly becoming something more than just a survivor. One evening, a week before the hearing, Emma looked up from her homework with that particular expression that meant she'd been thinking about something serious. Daddy, why do people keep calling you a hero? Ryan set down the dish he was washing. They'd been avoiding this conversation, but Emma was too smart to be put off forever. He sat down beside her at the kitchen table. Because I helped some people who were in trouble. But you help people all the time. You fix airplanes so they're safe. That's true. But this was different. These people were in danger right then, and I knew how to help them. Emma considered this, her young face serious. Were you scared? The question hit him harder than any congressional inquiry ever could. He could lie, could tell her that heroes weren't afraid, could perpetuate the myth that courage meant the absence of fear, but she deserved better. Yeah, sweetheart, I was terrified. But you helped them anyway? I did. Like when I was scared to be in the school play, but I did it anyway? Ryan smiled, remembering his own words to her that night. Exactly like that. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are. Emma nodded slowly, processing this with the earnest concentration she brought to all important matters. Is that what Mommy did? When she went to help people in the war? The question stole his breath. They'd told Emma the basics, that her mother had been a nurse, that she'd died helping injured people, that she'd been brave and kind. But they'd never discussed the choice Sarah made, the conscious decision to volunteer for a forward operating base despite the danger. Yes, Ryan said quietly. Your mom was scared too, but she knew people needed help and she was good at helping, so she went. Do you miss her? Every single day. Me too, even though I don't really remember her. Emma's eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed. Is it okay that I don't remember? Ryan pulled her into his arms, his own eyes burning. It's okay, baby. You were so little. But you know what? You're a lot like her. You're kind and brave, and you care about people. That's her legacy. That's what she left behind. Emma cried then, the kind of cleansing tears that came from releasing something long held in. Ryan held her and let his own tears fall, mourning all the moments Sarah would miss, all the conversations she'd never have with this incredible little human they'd created together. When Emma finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she said something that nearly broke him. I'm glad you're helping people, Daddy. I think it makes Mommy happy, wherever she is. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Ryan pulled out the box from his closet, the one he hadn't opened in 5 years. Inside were his Air Force memorabilia, flight logs, photographs from deployments, medals he'd never displayed. At the bottom was a letter, sealed in an envelope marked, "To Ryan, if the worst happens." Sarah had written it before her first deployment. He'd never opened it, couldn't bear to, because opening it would make her death feel final in a way that even the funeral hadn't. His hand shook as he broke the seal. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, looping and optimistic, even discussing her possible death. My darling Ryan, it began, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. I'm so sorry. Sorry for leaving you, for leaving our beautiful Emma, for all the moments we won't get to share. But I'm not sorry for going. You understand that, don't you? We both chose professions where helping people sometimes means putting ourselves at risk. That's not noble or heroic. It's just who we are. We're the people who can't walk away when others need help. I fell in love with you because you flew into danger to save people you'd never met. Don't let losing me change that about you. The world needs people who choose courage. Emma needs to see that in you. And I need you to promise me something. If I don't come home, you'll live. Not just survive, but really live. Find purpose, find joy. Show our daughter that loss doesn't have to mean the end of everything good. I love you more than words can say. But love doesn't mean holding on to grief forever. It means honoring what we had by continuing to be the man I fell in love with, the one who flies toward trouble instead of away from it. Take care of our girl. Tell her about me. And please, please don't let my death make you afraid to live fully. All my love, always, Sarah. Ryan read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. For 5 years, he'd been convinced that honoring Sarah meant carrying guilt, meant making himself smaller, meant never risking anything again because he'd already lost too much. But she'd known him better than that. She'd known that the man she loved couldn't survive in a cage of his own making. That purpose wasn't optional for people like them. It was oxygen. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wallet, next to Emma's latest school photo. It was time to stop surviving and start living. The congressional hearing took place in a wood-paneled room that smelled of old money and older grudges. Ryan sat at the witness table, a microphone in front of him, facing a semicircle of senators who ranged from genuinely interested to openly hostile. Senator Vance made the introductions, outlining Ryan's background and the purpose of the hearing. Then the questions began. Senator Patricia Kimball from Texas started friendly. Mr. Mercer, thank you for your service to our country, both in the military and in civilian aviation. Can you explain for the committee why current FAA emergency response training is insufficient? Ryan had rehearsed this answer a dozen times, but when he spoke, he abandoned the script. Senator, I can tell you what the manual says to do when an aircraft loses hydraulics. I can recite the emergency procedures word for word. But when Flight 821 was falling out of the sky, the manual wasn't enough. Captain Zhao needed to understand the principles behind those procedures so she could adapt them to a situation nobody had planned for. That's what current training doesn't teach, the why behind the what. We're training pilots to follow recipes when we should be teaching them to cook. Senator Marcus Webb from Illinois was less friendly. Mr. Mercer, do you have any idea what it would cost to implement the training protocols you're suggesting? We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars across the industry. I'm aware, Senator. Do you know what Flight 821 cost? $100 million aircraft at the bottom of the Pacific. Potential lawsuits that would have exceeded $1 billion. And that's just the money. How do you calculate the cost of 327 people who would never go home again? We can't prevent every accident. No, we can't. But we can give pilots the tools to survive the ones that happen. Flight 821 proves that. Ryan leaned forward. Ryan leaned. Senator, with respect, the question isn't whether we can afford better training. It's whether we can afford not to have it. Every pilot who doesn't know how to adapt in a crisis is a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. The questioning continued for over an hour. Some senators asked about specific technical procedures. Others focused on costs and implementation challenges. Senator Vance guided the discussion when it veered off course, but mostly let Ryan speak for himself. Then Senator Caroline Morris from New York asked the question Ryan had been dreading. Mr. Mercer, I've read your service record. Operation Guardian Eagle. You and Captain Mitchell flew an unauthorized mission into a combat zone to extract civilians. Your aircraft was severely damaged. Captain Mitchell was killed. You were medically discharged. Some might say that incident demonstrates poor judgment rather than heroism. What makes you qualified to train commercial pilots when your own decision-making led to a military casualty? The room went silent. Ryan felt the familiar weight of guilt settle over his shoulders, heard Captain Mitchell's last words on the radio, saw the fireball that used to be his wingman's F-16. Lena, sitting in the gallery behind him, leaned forward. He could feel her support even without looking. Ryan took a breath and met Senator Morris's eyes. You're right, Senator. We flew an unauthorized mission. We knew it was dangerous. We knew we might not make it back. He paused. One of those civilians we extracted was my wife, Sarah. She was a volunteer nurse who'd been caught in an ambush. But that's not why we went. We went because 6 people were about to be executed by militants, and we had the capability to save them. Captain Mitchell and I discussed the risks. We made our choice with full knowledge of the consequences. And your wingman died because of that choice. Yes, ma'am, he did. I carry that every single day. But those 6 people lived. They went home to their families. One of them was a doctor who's now running a clinic in rural Afghanistan. Another started a foundation to support refugee children. My wife got 3 more months of life, enough time to hold our daughter and tell her she loved her before a mortar attack took her away. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. Was it worth it? Ask those 6 people. Ask their families. Ask my daughter if her mother's choice to help others mattered. But you're traumatized by that experience. You were discharged. You struggled with PTSD. You hid for 5 years. How does that make you a role model for handling crisis situations? Ryan felt anger flash through him, hot and sharp. Senator, I'm not here to be a role model. I'm here to teach people how to survive when everything goes wrong, and I'm qualified because I know what that costs. Yes, I have scars. Yes, I struggled. But those scars taught me things no classroom ever could, that fear is manageable, that impossible situations have solutions if you're willing to think clearly under pressure, that giving up is a choice, and so is fighting. You want pilots who've never failed, who've never been broken, who've never faced their own mortality. Those pilots will freeze the first time something truly catastrophic happens. You want pilots who know darkness and chose to keep flying anyway? That's what I can teach. Senator Morris sat back, her expression unreadable. Senator Vance was almost smiling. Any further questions? Vance asked the committee. There were a few more, mostly technical, but the energy had shifted. Ryan had laid himself bare, shared the rawest parts of his story, and in doing so had made his point more powerfully than any prepared testimony could have. When the hearing concluded, Ryan stepped down from the witness table feeling simultaneously drained and liberated. Lena met him in the hallway. That was incredible, she said. The way you handled Morris, I almost lost it. No, you used it. You showed them that expertise isn't about being perfect. It's about learning from failure. She gripped his arm. Ryan, you just changed the conversation. Whether the legislation passes or not, you made them see this differently. Over the next week, Ryan's testimony went viral. Not the sanitized highlight reel, but the raw, emotional response to Senator Morris. News outlets played it repeatedly. Veterans groups praised his honesty about PTSD. Aviation experts called it the most compelling argument for training reform they'd heard. Even Senator Morris issued a statement saying she'd been impressed by his candor and was reconsidering her position. But the response that mattered most came from a different source. 10 days after the hearing, Ryan received a letter forwarded from Crosshair's corporate office. The return address was simply the Mitchell family. Inside was a photograph of Captain Jason Mitchell in his flight suit, smiling at the camera with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the sky. Below it was a handwritten note from his widow, Karen. Mr. Mercer, I watched your testimony. For 8 years, I've struggled with whether Jason's death meant something or if he just died for nothing. Your words gave me an answer I didn't know I needed. He died doing what he believed in, saving people who needed help. So did your wife. And you've honored both of them by continuing that mission in a different way. Thank you for finally speaking the truth about that day. Thank you for surviving when he didn't. And thank you for using that survival to make a difference. Jason would be proud. I know I am. With deep respect, Karen Mitchell, Ryan cried reading it. Great heaving sobs that emptied out years of survivor's guilt and self-recrimination. Emma found him and climbed into his lap without asking why, just holding on until the storm passed. It's okay, Daddy, she whispered. It's okay to be sad. I know, baby. These are good tears, healing tears. Like when you clean out a cut so it can get better? Exactly like that. 6 weeks after the hearing, Senator Vance's aviation safety reform bill passed committee with bipartisan support. It wouldn't solve everything. Bureaucracy moved slowly, implementation would take years. But it was a start. The legislation mandated enhanced crisis training for commercial pilots, incorporated real-world emergency scenarios into certification requirements, and established a grant program to support veteran pilot involvement in training programs. Crosshair's Flight Safety Operations Division was specifically cited as a model for the kind of practical expertise the FAA should integrate into its standards. Lena called Ryan into her office the day the bill passed. When he arrived, she was standing by her window with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that looked older than both of them. Celebrating? Ryan asked. Acknowledging. She poured 2 fingers into each glass and handed him one. 6 months ago, you were a maintenance tech who wanted to be invisible. Today, you changed federal aviation policy. That deserves acknowledgement. They touched glasses, the crystal chiming softly. I couldn't have done it without you, Ryan said. You saw something in me I'd given up on. No. Lena shook her head. I saw something you'd buried. Big difference. You did the hard work of digging it back up. She took a sip, savoring it. I need to tell you something about that first flight, when I said those things to you. Lena, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because I've built my whole life on measuring value by obvious metrics. Money, power, status. And I looked at you and saw someone who didn't register on any of those scales. So I treated you like you didn't matter. But you know what I've learned? The most valuable things are usually invisible until you really look. Courage, integrity. The quiet determination to keep showing up even when everything in you says to quit. You had all that, and I almost missed it because I was too busy being impressed with myself. Ryan was quiet for a moment. You apologized months ago. I apologized for being rude. This is different. This is thanking you for proving me wrong about everything I thought mattered, for showing me that success without humanity is just well-decorated emptiness. She met his eyes. You made me want to be better, Ryan. Not more successful. Better. You were always better than you gave yourself credit for. You just needed to see it. Lena smiled, and there was something bittersweet in it. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The CEO who forgot what mattered and the pilot who forgot he could still fly. Except neither of us is that person anymore. No, she agreed. We're not. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the Seattle skyline transition from afternoon to evening, both of them thinking about the journey that had brought them here. Finally, Ryan spoke again. What's next? For Crosshair? For the division? Growth. We've got contracts with 3 more airlines. The Navy wants us to consult on helicopter emergency protocols. And there's something else. She pulled a folder from her desk. A proposal I've been working on. I wanted your input before taking it to the board. Ryan opened it. Inside was a detailed plan for a foundation. The Mitchell Mercer Foundation for Aviation Safety and Veteran Support. It would fund advanced training programs, provide scholarships for veterans transitioning to civilian aviation careers, and support research into crisis management and PTSD treatment for pilots. The funding would come from Crossair initially, Lena explained, but I'm reaching out to other aviation companies, airlines, even some of the families from Flight 821 who've expressed interest in contributing. It could be something lasting, something that honors the people we lost by protecting the ones still flying. Ryan's throat tightened. You want to name it after Mitchell and me? You and Captain Mitchell gave everything for this work. Sarah gave everything. This feels like the right way to honor that. She watched his face. But it's your call. If having your name attached to something this public is too much, no. Ryan surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. No, it's perfect. Jason deserves to be remembered. Sarah deserves to be remembered. And if this foundation can help other people avoid the losses we experienced, then putting my name on it is a small price to pay. Lena's smile was radiant. Then let's build it. Over the following months, the foundation took shape. Ryan recruited other veteran pilots, built partnerships with universities and training facilities, established scholarship programs. He found himself teaching regularly, not just technical skills, but the mental resilience required to fly when everything was falling apart. One afternoon, he was running a crisis simulation for a group of commercial pilots when Amy Zhao walked in. She'd returned to flying 3 months after Flight 821, proving to herself and the world that one near-death experience wouldn't define her career. Mind if I observe? She asked. Only if you're willing to jump in and share your perspective. She did, offering insights that only someone who'd lived through a ditching could provide. The pilots hung on her every word, asking questions that went beyond procedure into the psychological reality of crisis management. After the session, Amy pulled Ryan aside. I've been thinking about something. David, my first officer from Flight 821, he's struggling, hasn't been able to get back in a cockpit. Says every time he tries, he has panic attacks. That's not uncommon. The trauma response can be delayed. I know, but he's a good pilot, Ryan. He doesn't want to give it up, but he doesn't know how to get past the fear. She hesitated. Would you talk to him? Not as an instructor, as someone who's been there. Ryan met with David Mendez the following week at a quiet coffee shop. The younger man looked haunted, dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling slightly as he gripped his cup. Amy says you struggled with PTSD, David said, after your service. Still do sometimes. It gets better, but it doesn't disappear. How do you deal with it? How do you get back in the cockpit when your body is screaming that flying means death? Ryan thought about his answer carefully. You don't fight the fear. You acknowledge it. You respect it. Fear is your brain's way of trying to protect you from danger. The problem is it can't always distinguish between real danger and remembered danger. So you have to retrain it. How? Small steps, gradual exposure, and understanding that healing isn't linear. You'll have good days and setbacks, and both are normal. Ryan leaned forward. David, you survived something catastrophic. Your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do by being hypervigilant, but you can teach it that flying isn't the same as that one terrifying experience. It takes time and usually professional help. Have you considered therapy? I tried. The therapist didn't understand aviation, kept suggesting I find a different career. Then find a therapist who specializes in trauma for first responders or military personnel. Someone who understands that for some people, walking away from their calling is worse than facing the fear. Ryan pulled out his phone. I know someone. Former Air Force psychologist who works specifically with pilots dealing with trauma. She helped me. Want her contact information? David's eyes filled with tears. You really think I can get past this? I know you can. It won't be easy and it won't be quick. But yes, you can. I'm living proof. 6 months later, David Mendez returned to flying. His first flight was a short regional hop, and Amy Zhao specifically requested to be his captain. Ryan was waiting at the gate when they landed, watching David emerge from the cockpit with a smile that could have powered the aircraft. I did it, David said simply. I never doubted you. As Ryan's work expanded, something unexpected happened. Emma started asking questions, not about his trauma or his losses, but about his work. What did he teach? Why was it important? Could she visit his office sometime? He brought her to Crossair on a Saturday when the building was quiet, showed her the flight simulators, the training materials, the photographs on his office wall of pilots he'd worked with. Emma was fascinated by everything, asking questions with the intense curiosity she brought to subjects that interested her. "Is this what you did in the Air Force?" she asked, looking at a photo of an F-16. "Similar. But in the Air Force, the stakes were different. We were protecting people by stopping threats. Now I protect people by teaching them how to save themselves." "Which do you like better?" The question stopped him. He'd never thought about it in those terms. Preference implied choice, and his transition from military to civilian life had felt anything but chosen. But looking at Emma's earnest face, he realized the answer was simple. "This," he said, "because I get to come home to you every night. Because I can help people without having to hurt anyone. Because the work we do here honors everyone we lost by making sure fewer people have to experience that loss." Emma nodded, processing this. Then she asked, "When I grow up, can I help people too?" Ryan pulled her into a hug. "Sweetheart, you can be anything you want. But yes, helping people is always a good choice." 1 year after Flight 821, the survivors organized a reunion. All 327 passengers and crew gathering at a hotel conference center in Seattle to celebrate the anniversary of the day they didn't die. Ryan almost didn't go. The thought of that much concentrated gratitude still made him uncomfortable. But Lena convinced him, and more importantly, Emma wanted to come. "I want to meet the people you saved," she'd said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "I want to see why you do this." The reunion was chaotic and joyful, people embracing and crying and showing off photos of the year they'd lived since the ditching. A woman was pregnant with her second child. A man had reconciled with his estranged daughter. A teenager had graduated high school and been accepted to college. 327 people whose lives had continued in all their messy, beautiful complexity. When Ryan entered with Emma, someone recognized him and started applauding. Then everyone joined in, a standing ovation that lasted long enough to be embarrassing. Emma gripped his hand, wide-eyed at the response. Amy found them and crouched down to Emma's level. "You must be Emma. Your dad told me about you. You should know, your daddy is the bravest person I've ever met." "He says you're the brave one," Emma replied, "because you landed the plane." Amy smiled. "We're both brave. We just showed it in different ways. That's what your dad taught me, that courage looks different for everyone, but it always matters." Throughout the afternoon, passengers approached to thank Ryan, to introduce their families, to share what the past year had meant. A young couple showed him wedding photos. They'd gotten married 2 months after the ditching, deciding life was too short to wait. An elderly man introduced his great-grandson, born 3 weeks earlier. A business executive explained how the experience had changed his priorities, leading him to leave his high-stress job and start a nonprofit. Emma watched it all with quiet wonder. Later, on the drive home, she was uncharacteristically silent. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Ryan asked. "All those people are alive because of you. Because of a lot of people working together. But you helped, even when you were scared, even when it was hard." She paused. "I think Mommy would be proud." Ryan's eyes burned. "Yeah, baby, I think she would be." That night, after Emma was asleep, Ryan sat at his kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to anyone living, just words he needed to say. "Dear Sarah, dear Jason, dear everyone I've lost. I spent 5 years thinking the best I could do was survive without causing more damage. I was wrong. The best I can do is use what I learned from losing you to help others avoid the same loss. I'm not the same person I was before the war, before the crashes, before the grief. I'm someone different now, not better or worse, just different. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to stay the same when life breaks us. Maybe we're supposed to let the breaking reshape us into something new. I'll never stop missing you. I'll never stop wishing things had turned out differently. But I'm finally starting to understand that honoring your memory doesn't mean staying frozen in grief. It means living fully, courageously, in ways that would make you proud. I hope I'm doing that. I'm trying. Emma's growing up beautiful and brave and kind. She asks about you, Sarah. I tell her the truth, that you were incredible, that you chose to help people even when it was dangerous, that she carries your legacy in her every kind choice. I think you'd love who she's becoming. The foundation launches next month. We're already funding scholarships for 10 veteran pilots. The training programs are expanding. Senator Vance's bill is being implemented across major airlines. Flight 821 wasn't the last emergency, but the pilots we've trained are handling crises with competence and calm. We're making a difference. Not enough to erase what was lost, but enough to matter. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. And thank you for the letter, Sarah, for giving me permission to live instead of just survive. I'm finally taking you up on that. With love and gratitude, Ryan. He folded the letter and placed it with Sarah's, keeping them together in his wallet, where they'd stay close to his heart. 2 years after that first emergency landing in Boise, Lena Cross stood at a podium in front of aviation industry leaders, FAA officials, and members of Congress. The Mitchell Mercer Foundation was officially launching, with funding secured, programs established, and a vision that extended far beyond what she'd initially imagined. Ryan sat in the front row with Emma, watching Lena speak with the passion and precision that had built her empire, now redirected toward something that mattered more than profit margins. 2 years ago, Lena said, I stood in a first-class cabin and looked at a man I didn't know and made a snap judgment about his value. I was wrong in ways I'm still learning to understand. That man, Ryan Mercer, saved my life twice. Once by landing a failing aircraft, and once by showing me that success without humanity is meaningless. This foundation exists because Ryan refused to let his losses define him, because Captain Jason Mitchell and Nurse Sarah Mercer chose courage over safety, because 327 people survived against impossible odds and reminded us all why this work matters. We can't prevent every tragedy, but we can prepare people to survive them. We can honor those we've lost by protecting those still flying, and we can build a future where expertise and compassion work together to keep our skies safe. That's what the Mitchell Mercer Foundation is committed to doing, not just today, but for generations to come. The applause was thunderous. Ryan felt Emma squeeze his hand, her pride evident in her shining eyes. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Lena found Ryan on the terrace overlooking Elliott Bay. The late afternoon sun painted the water gold, fairies cutting through the light like moving sculptures. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For giving me the chance to be part of something that matters, for teaching me to see differently. She smiled. For not giving up on me after I was such a complete ass in that first-class cabin. Ryan laughed. You weren't that bad. I was worse, but you gave me grace I didn't deserve. She looked out at the water. I've been thinking about next steps. For Crossair, for my career. I built this company to prove something, to myself, to my father who said I'd never succeed, to every person who underestimated me. But I've proven it. And now I'm wondering if there's something more. What are you thinking? Transitioning Crossair to my senior leadership team and focusing full-time on the foundation, using everything I've learned about building organizations to scale this work globally. She met his eyes. Would you consider becoming co-director? Equal partnership, shared vision, building something that outlasts both of us? Ryan thought about it. Not the logistics, but the meaning. He'd spent years hiding from purpose, then months rebuilding it. Now Lena was offering him the chance to make it permanent, to dedicate himself fully to work that honored everyone he'd lost while helping everyone still flying. Yes, he said, let's build it. 5 years after that first emergency landing, Emma Mercer stood at her middle school science fair presenting a project on aviation safety and human factors in crisis management. She'd interviewed her father, Captain Zhao, several foundation scholarship recipients, and even Senator Vance. Her presentation was confident and thorough, demonstrating not just knowledge but deep understanding of why the work mattered. Ryan watched from the back of the room, his heart swelling with pride. This was Sarah's legacy too. This bright, compassionate, determined young woman who'd inherited her mother's desire to help and her father's courage to act. After the presentation, Emma found him in the crowd. Did I do okay? You were amazing. Your mom would be so proud. I know. I felt her with me up there. Emma smiled. Dad, I've been thinking. When I grow up, I want to be a pilot, like you were, like Captain Zhao. I want to help keep people safe. Ryan's throat tightened. Part of him wanted to protect her from the dangers inherent in aviation, from the risks that had cost him so much. But a larger part, the part Sarah's letter had awakened, knew that trying to keep her safe by limiting her dreams was the worst kind of protection. Then we'll make sure you get the best training possible, he said, and I'll be there every step of the way. That evening, Ryan stood in his apartment, larger now, filled with photos documenting a life being actively lived rather than merely survived. Pictures of Emma at various ages, photos from Foundation events, candid shots of the Flight 821 reunion, a framed newspaper article about the legislation passing, and on the mantle, in a place of honor, the photos of Sarah and Jason, not hidden away in boxes, but displayed proudly alongside the life that continued because of their sacrifice. His phone buzzed. A text from Lena. Just got confirmation. The foundation is expanding to Europe and Asia. We're going global. This is really happening. Ryan smiled and typed back. Of course it is. We built it to last. He walked to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. She was 12 now, on the edge of adolescence, her face still holding traces of childhood, but beginning to show the woman she'd become. So much of Sarah in her features, in her spirit, in her fierce determination to make a difference. The sky had taken everything from him once. His partner, his wife, his career, his certainty about who he was and what his life meant. The wreckage of those losses had seemed insurmountable, a crater too deep to climb out of. But slowly, painfully, one choice at a time, he'd built something new from the broken pieces. Not a replacement for what was lost. Nothing could replace that. But something meaningful in its own right. A foundation that would save lives. A daughter who understood courage. A purpose that honored the past while building toward the future. He thought about Lena, about their unlikely partnership born from her initial judgment and his quiet competence. About how two broken people, one who'd lost sight of what mattered, one who'd lost everything that mattered, had found their way to something transcendent by simply choosing to show up and do the work. He thought about the 327 people from Flight 821, living their lives, raising families, pursuing dreams that had almost ended in the Pacific Ocean. Each of them a reminder that the impossible was just the difficult wearing a scary mask. And he thought about the letter still in his wallet, Sarah's handwriting fading but her words permanent. Love doesn't mean holding on to grief forever. It means honoring what we had by continuing to be the man I fell in love with. Ryan had spent 5 years learning that lesson, but he finally understood it now. Survival wasn't the goal. Living was. Being broken wasn't the end. It was the beginning of becoming something new. And the sky that had taken everything, had also given him a second chance to choose what truly mattered. He chose purpose over comfort, courage over safety, connection over isolation. He chose to teach others how to survive their own impossible moments, to build something lasting from temporary loss, to show his daughter that strength wasn't the absence of scars, but the decision to keep flying despite them. The sky waited, vast and dangerous and beautiful. Ryan Mercer was finally ready to meet it on his own terms, not as the broken pilot hiding from his past, but as the man who'd learned that broken pieces could still build cathedrals if you had the courage to keep stacking stones. The foundation would continue, the work would expand, lives would be saved. And every time a pilot landed a dying aircraft, every time a crisis was managed with competence and calm, every time someone chose to help instead of hide, Ryan would know that the worst moments of his life had been transformed into something that mattered. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.